Good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday night here on the OBR streaming network, and you are inside the Browns beat. I'm Mike. He is Fred, and we have got another great show coming up for you here on one of the OBR's newest hit shows, talking about the Cleveland Browns here on Inside the Browns beat. Fred and I are going to spend the first 30 minutes just chatting it up about what we saw with the Browns week one, a little bit of news, all that stuff, and then we're going to welcome in our special guest from Locked On Browns from 92.3 The Fan. Spencer German's going to join us to dive into a little bit deeper with Fred and myself and you in the comments on everything Cleveland Browns. So hopefully you're buckled in for the next hour because we've got a great show planned for you. First of all, before we get into anything Browns related, make sure you get over to theobr.com and hit subscribe. The OBR is the oldest and largest independent Browns coverage site in all of Cleveland. So make sure you are tuned into everything OBR as we are officially in the regular season now. We're officially 0-1, officially in very familiar territory, and nowhere covers it like the OBR covers it. So get over there now. Also, if you're joining us live here tonight on YouTube or Twitch, make sure you hit subscribe, make sure you hit like, and that's all the formalities. So Fred, now that we got all that out of the way, here we are, week one in the books.
Yeah, it makes me sweat a little bit after listening to all that. You know, as far as, we're good at this. We've talking about losses, opening day losses, and where do we go from here? And so we're right in our wheelhouse. Unfortunately, it was a loss. They snatched a victory from the jaws of defeat. You know, they had that right there and found a way to lose the game. But there's a lot of positives coming out of that game. But you know, we talked about all offseason, or even since we started this, is that those 6 first games are a gauntlet, you know, and this was one you felt like when you looked at the schedule, Bengals are good, but on the road, you know, you might be able to get one right off the bat. That'd go a long way, you know, in this first part of the thing, but it is what it is. Now they go to the Lions' Den to play the Ravens, and they're celebrating taking the Browns from Cleveland 30 years ago. What a nice, I saw they tried to backtrack and said, oh, we picked this date before we knew the schedule. Yeah, right. Kick dirt in the face of the, you know, Browns fans.
Yeah, well, listen, we see it increasingly happen over time. Reminds me a lot of what the Tennessee Titans did to the Houston Texans when they wore their throwback Oilers jerseys and they picked the Texans game to do it, which that was disgusting. But that's what we're getting. And yeah, I know they're trying to walk it back, the cowards that they are in Baltimore. Oh no, we had this planned in March before we even knew the schedule. Yeah, right. Yeah, right, Baltimore. Yeah, right. We don't believe you. Mm-hmm. Liars, cheats. And listen, I hope the Browns are going to come ready with a little intensity, because we can't be letting the Ravens celebrate that in this game.
Yeah, it means a lot to Joe Flacco. Maybe not a lot of the younger people that weren't even born. You know, Denzel Ward talked today, and he's from Cleveland. 2 or 3 reporters asked him about this, said didn't really mean a big deal to him because, I mean, first of all, he wasn't born when the team moved. And, you know, so I think they're going to get the groundswell as the week goes on. But, yeah, I mean, it would be, I mean, it kind of, I don't know how you feel, but it seems to me when teams in the NFL, when teams win, they're more prone to be beat the next week. The Ravens, you know, the way they lost the Bills, you know, if they would have won that game, you almost feel they'd be more prime for an upset. Right. But they don't want to go 0-2, and they've got their attention now because of that loss, and they've been hearing it. They've been giving up leads, their defense, you know, late. And so the Browns are going to have their hands full again. Another test for the defense. You know, was that just a one-off, or is this defense, can they play with the best of them? And right now, after that first week, I think the Ravens are ranked number 1 in the NFL in offense scoring. I mean, obviously, or number 2 because they lost 41-40. But on the other side, their defense is near the bottom for giving up those amount of points. So Browns are at number 2 right now in the NFL in defense. And, you know, if they can play the way they did against the Bengals, which is a high-powered offense, came into last year. They finished the number one scoring team in the NFL, 28 points a game. And Browns really, other than that first drive, gave up over half the yardage of the game in that first drive. Played great. They just didn't take the ball away. That's the only, and that ultimately is the difference.
Well, that was a topic I had written down, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But again, two very unlucky giveaways, and then no takeaways. Just that's the only thing that I felt like, here we go again from last year. I thought they played pretty well. I thought they gave a great effort. I think offensively, defensively, there was a lot to like about the Browns game. And I know everybody likes to say, oh, typical, we're going to talk about a loss and talk about positives. But again, as somebody who came in and said that this team reminds him a lot more of the team from 2 years ago than the team from last year, when I saw it, there was a team that looked a lot more like the team from 2 years ago than the team from last year. And we saw a lot of what people were talking about as we've gone through these preview episodes, Fred, and the people in the comments have been consistently talking about complimentary football. And man, did we see a lot more of that. We saw the defense getting some rest because the Browns offense could at least stay on the field, even if it didn't result in a score. They could put a little drive together to give a little rest, and you saw the impact that made in the game. But if you want to look at what happened last year and liken it to this game, again, just no ability to get a takeaway. And especially there were a couple times where you thought, man, if they could just take the ball away from the Bengals here, this is going to just lock the game up. And they just weren't able to do it. And I don't know whether is it a scheme thing, Fred? Do they talk about it in the building? Do the coaches address it in front of the media as far as just not being able to get the takeaways?
Well, Jim Schwartz, we talked to tomorrow. He talks about it all the time. I know they're working on it out on the field, punching the ball out. But one thing Kevin Stefanski said today, and Denzel Ward, and it was kind of prevalent, that it is true. When you're not playing from ahead, if you have a lead and the other team has to throw, that's when takeaways happen more so, especially the interceptions, when they have to throw to get back in the game. That's, what leads to the takeaways. And even in this game, the only lead the Browns had was that 16-14 lead, when Smith missed the extra point, so you weren't in a position where the Bengals were playing really from behind, if you call it a 2-point game. So they weren't forced to throw the ball or whatever. It is hard to figure, all the studies on just about everything when it comes to luck, gambling, it pretty much is 50-50. So I was expecting the turnovers this year to maybe even out from last year. I mean, obviously the Browns were lopsided by throwing so many interceptions last year, but the takeaways is what I'm talking about.
Yep.
We talked about those 2 interceptions. How many times does a receiver hit the ball and basically it's almost like they just tossed it right back? I don't think the defensive backs, I'm not taking anything away from, but they weren't making outstanding plays. They just happened to be standing there when the ball came into their arms. And, that's what hurts. Even if it's 0-0 in turnovers, you win the game. But you lose the game because, again, that's the most important statistic. And I know they emphasize it, but I just don't know. It seems like they come mostly in the passing game, either on strip sacks or on, trying to throw the ball downfield to get yourself back in the game. And at least in one game, they haven't played with a lead, really. They did everything they wanted to do. The script, take time off the clock, keep the defense off the field, give them some rest, keep Joe Burrow off the field. I mean, if you'd have told me, if you'd had on your bingo card, Mike, hold Burrow to 113 yards,
right?
Have 22 first downs to the Bengals 11, have the ball for 35 to 24, you'd think Browns probably win by 2 touchdowns.
7 offensive yards in the second half for the Bengals. 7.
Yeah, I mean, you look all the way around. It's you just scratch your head. And I think part of it is that culture. They started to come out of it, win close games, but then last year it kind of spiraled out of control after the early part of the season when they couldn't win. And again, they found a way to lose a close game. And it really was those 2 turnovers and obviously the missed kicks.
I'll be honest with you, Fred. This will be a throwback for you. As we were planning the next show tonight, which is Garage Beers, which you should all stick around for at 9:00 tonight. As I was planning that, oh, by the way, we have former Cleveland Browns linebacker and current head coach of the Strongsville Mustangs, Jason Trusnick on. So
nice.
We're gonna have a good time with him. But the guy that I was originally trying to get, because we were all worked up about this Ravens Browns rub it in our face thing, man, I was desperately trying to find a way to get in touch with Steve Everett. Still to this day, my favorite Cleveland Browns player of all time, just because of the bandana. And there may be some people who, I think a lot of people in our crowd are going to remember Steve Everett. But I think Steve's just kind of like off on a boat or something somewhere, just coasting around, living his life. So we're gonna have a good time with Jason Trusnick. But that would have been, I've always wanted to catch up on him on the Browns Steelers thing, or I'm sorry, the Browns Ravens thing. And the move and the bandana and all that, just a legend, just a Cleveland legend. Anyways, Fred, so let's kind of just, before we bring Spencer in at 7:30, let's kind of just go through this game against the Bengals and just talk about the big talking points here. I think one, let's start with Joe Flacco. And let's start with our thoughts on the way he played and what it looked like from 2 years ago to last year, what we saw with Joe Flacco in Indianapolis, which was kind of disastrous for Joe Flacco. And then back in it, it feels, Fred, like everything we've heard, it feels like all the words came to fruition. I don't think Joe Flacco was the best he's ever been by any stretch, but man, does he feel comfortable running a Kevin Stefanski offense. Like you could just see it out there, right, Fred?
Yeah, he's in total control, total command. And that's one of the things we talked about here. When the Browns were talking about Kenny Pickett, I'm like, man, especially with this schedule, this is the guy that's going to weather the storm. He was undaunted. He stood in the pocket. He even ran a little bit. But, yeah, he's very comfortable. The only thing different than 2 years ago, he didn't really take shots. And that was, I think, more of a game plan. We asked him a little bit today, and he said that was sometimes it's the flow of the game, but they felt like, moving the ball, with those short swing passes to Sampson and so forth, that's kind of like an extended rushing game. And I think what was impressive more so even, Mike, is that they really had no running game, and they were still able to put up 327 yards, 290 passing. He had 5 costly drop passes. Any one of them would have put him over 300 yards. And probably you could make a case any one of those would have led to a victory or at least another field goal attempt. So it is. I think he played very well. I think that for this team, transitioning so many young rookies, I was surprised that many contributed. They had like 8, and on that first touchdown drive, they had 4 rookies touch the ball. Harold Fannin took a direct snap, and he caught 3 passes. Isaiah Bond caught a pass. Dylan Sampson was involved. And, of course, Raheem Sanders scored the touchdown. So,
yeah.
You got the 40-year-old veteran with all these rookies around him. That's got to give those young guys confidence, looking in his eyes with us, with ice water in his veins, saying, come on, guys, it's cool. Let's do it, And, I thought he played very well. It's a shame that the way they do stats, they give the quarterback the interceptions on balls that the receivers drop and tip it right to the DBs, because his stats were much better than what it came out because of the interceptions. But yeah, I think that bodes well. I thought he was going to have a good game, and he did have a good game. And I think, is if some of these receivers can step up. And I mean, the one that you were most disappointed with, was Jerry Jeudy. Dropped the fourth down pass, and then he had the interception go off his hands to the defender. And you know, you got a lot of young guys that make mistakes, but you were hoping Jeudy wouldn't be one of them. He did lead the NFL last year with 13 drops. So that's kind of part of his game. I'd like to see maybe the go ball, the deep ball with Jeudy or Isaiah Bond or somebody, maybe to loosen things up. But, this week it was more underneath.
Well, and to go back to what I was saying before on the takeaways and all that, I think you kind of do have to play that way because it's hard to take. I didn't want to sound like I was just obtuse to the situation. Joe Burrow is one of the best quarterbacks at not giving the ball away in the NFL. So it's difficult to get it from him. And that's the kind of offense you got to run to try to keep him off the field. But yeah, I, like you said, I thought it just felt like that, just right back into that seamless kind of offense. I think they did, Fred. I am concerned about their ability to run the ball. I'm concerned about the run blocking. I'm concerned a bit about the run schemes. I'm interested to hear if you've heard anything in the building about them talking about just how they can scheme up the run a little bit better. Because, it's one thing to say, Jerome Ford didn't have many yards and Sampson, I think, looked really good, but he didn't rush the ball for a ton of yards and all that stuff. But I don't, obviously I don't think that's entirely just on the running backs. I think the whole run scheme didn't look great. So what are you hearing in the building about, just their ability to run the ball?
Yeah, that's been a topic. You average 2 yards a carry, and it's almost amazing that Flacco could be as effective as he was without a running game. I mean, they had 49 yards, rushing, and on 24 carries. And so they use the short passing game with Sampson almost like an extended handoff, but it's got to get better than that because, they're gonna completely force you to throw the ball and put people in the box if you cannot run the ball. As far as the scheme, they talked about, we were just one off here, one off there. You're expecting that group, that offensive line to be seamless, and that's their forte. My approach was they're back to the wide zone. This is what they want to be doing. They were effective in the past. They weren't that effective the other day. Of course, Conklin got hurt, but Cornelius Lucas, you didn't hear his name. He didn't, as far as I know, he didn't drop off much. But yeah, you got to have a better push than I was expecting them because the Bengals weren't known for having that great of a defense, and they shut the Browns' running game down. Now, the silver lining, when they drafted Judkins and Sampson, to me, was Sampson was going to be your third down, exactly what you saw the other day. Get the ball out of the backfield, pass catcher. And Judkins was going to be your banger between the tackles. Now, I don't know if things would change with him in there versus Ford between the tackles if you don't get a little more push up front. But to me, that's the silver lining, is I think a great back can make up. You give him any daylight, he can get the yardage. But we don't know if he's going to play. He was in New York today, meeting with the NFL. Don't know if they're going to wrap up their investigation and suspend him or say, hey, okay, that's good, or even if he'll be able to play. Thought he was going to practice today, Thursday, Friday, and then see some action in the game. Stefanski just said he's day-to-day. They got to see, since he didn't practice today, they basically have 2 days with him. I think he'll be up to speed mentally, but I don't know the body. When you're working out on your own, I don't know if you can be ready to play football. If it's on a pitch count, that'd be okay. I think you got to get him out there, and give him, let him feel a little bit of it. So the sooner you can get him up to speed, the better.
Yeah, I was thinking about this today, and I think there's probably an obvious answer to this, and I think it's probably the direction that the Cleveland Browns go. I know I put a tweet out about it after the game, and A lot of people chimed in. But right now, Judkins, he is signed, but he's on a 2-week roster exemption. While they just kind of figure out what else is going on with the league, as he's effectively serving out an unofficial suspension, apparently. But Fred, with what we saw, I think Dylan Sampson did so much to impress everybody. And what a weapon, especially in a game where the running game wasn't going really well. What a weapon to still have that kind of guy out of the backfield to make plays. We saw the struggles of Jerome Ford, and I don't think anything should be done based on one game when a guy struggles. But we've also seen it now for a few years with Jerome Ford. We kind of see what he can do. He's got some good games. He's got some not so good games, and that's just kind of what he's been. And again, we didn't see him a lot, but we saw Raheem Rocket Sanders score the touchdown. They put him in there in those short yardage situations. When Quinshon Judkins comes off that 2-week roster exemption, they're going to have to clear somebody for him. So do you think the plan at this point is, they're going to clear they're going to probably cut Sanders, get him down to the practice squad if they can, and then roll with Ford and Sampson and Judkins? Or is there somewhere else where you think they'd make space and carry 4 running backs?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that they very well could keep 4. I think they like Sanders. I was actually a little surprised that after he got 3 carries on the first touchdown drive, he didn't carry the ball the game. But you could say that you got him on waivers, so they might be thinking that he would make it through waivers and you can put him back on the practice squad. You gave Ford guaranteed money, took a 50% pay cut, but I don't know. I don't think he's going to be here next year. So I guess it's just, if they're that impressed with Sanders and they don't want to take a chance on losing him, do they move on from Ford? But I just feel like, you 4 isn't an ultimate big amount to keep on the roster. I just would have to look around, see where else they have areas where they could move on, from somebody. I know they've signed 2 guys that were with them in training camp, defensive linemen, put them on the practice squad the last 2 days. And I saw Julian Aquara, who's on the practice squad, over on the stationary bike. He didn't show up on the injury report because he's on the practice squad. So that might have something to do with bringing in Holly and Henry. But I don't know at this point. Haven't studied, on the line on what they might do. But I do think that they have to get the running game going. And if Judkins can be what they want, I really envision kind of like ultimately like Judkins, Sampson, kind of like how Ohio State had Judkins, Travion Henderson.
Mm-hmm.
I think they work, if you can get 2 guys with a different skill set playing off each other, I think you can keep them fresh, but you can also do a lot of things with them. And so that's where I think it's heading. Who's going to be behind that? I don't know really if they think Sanders that highly of him to keep him over Ford, or like you said, let him go and go back to the practice squad.
We spent a lot of time already talking about Dylan Sampson, but let's just kind of expand this out, Fred, because, outside of the fact that things looked much more in control offensively this year, the system looked more familiar. You had the Joe Flacco effect, obviously. And I think, again, just being able to keep the ball on the field the way they were, it was just so different than what we saw pretty much all year last year. But let's expand this conversation out, because Dylan Sampson was incredibly impressive, but you got a lot of young guys that went out there and played. A lot of guys played their first NFL game this week, and they all looked impressive, whether it's offensively, and we're talking about Sampson. And, man, Harold Fannin looked really good. I know he had a drop, actually a really big drop that would have moved the sticks. But outside of that, he looked great. You go over to the defensive side of the ball, Fred, and Mason Graham I think he was as advertised. You didn't hear him making a ton of huge plays, but, man, he was in on a lot of things. And Carson Swessinger over on that side of the ball we have been ramping up and talking up Carson Swessinger all preseason long. And, man, did he not disappoint. He was great on the defensive side of the ball. So just talk about this influx of these young kids. And you talked about Isaiah Bond got a touch. I would have liked to see him get a few more, but seems like they really have hit on some young talent this year.
Yeah, they needed that. I mean, early indication is this is kind of a home run, with the draft, at least contributor. You have 12 rookies. That's out of 53. That's, 25% of your roster. And so the Browns are trying to thread the needle. They're trying to be competitive with them veterans that are in their prime, but also transition, get younger on the roster. So you got to play some of these younger guys. And like you said, on offense, four of them contributed on the touchdown drive. And Aiden Huntington came in, and I think he was the lead blocker on the touchdown. And, he had a pancake or was making some move there. And then on defense, under the first drive, I think Graham might have been finding his way, but you've seen video of him really playing well, especially in that triple sack drive, eating up people in the middle and collapse in the pocket and, all the way around. So I think it bodes well if you can get these guys experience, but if you get some wins and build, while they're getting their experience out there. And so that's again why it hurts so bad, and when Judkins comes back, that'd be 13 rookies on the team. And so that's, it bodes well for the future. You just need to stack and keep adding players every year. That's where you miss on the trade of Watson, all the holes, because you have at least 3 first-round picks that should be in the lineup starting somewhere. Doesn't mean they would have been, but and even second-round picks and so forth. I think 6 picks over. So, that's where you got to replenish the roster, but you're trying to be competitive right now. And so I think they've got a blend. We'll see how they fare. Obviously another gauntlet this week with the Ravens on the road.
Fred, keep it up just real quick on the defensive side of the ball. And obviously we always just jump right to the defensive line because you saw what they can do. That second half, man, that defensive line was exactly what we wanted it to be. That 3-sack drive was just a thing of beauty, almost resulted in a safety. But I want to take it away from there for a minute. I want to go to that defensive backfield, Fred, and get your thoughts, because that is, outside of like wide receiver depth, I think the area that people had a lot of concern about coming into this season was the defensive backfield, specifically at the corners. And I think they played really well. From Denzel Ward, I think played his normal game. I think Greg Newsome looked really good and really comfortable on the outside. And there was nothing really that we noticed on that side of the ball as far as, that looks like a major weakness there. And against an offense like the Bengals, that's a pretty good indicator. That's a pretty good start for the year.
Yeah, and I think it does work hand in hand with that pressure from the defensive line that enabled Ward and Newsome. They didn't have to hang on so long. They're going to be tested this week because Lamar's the opposite. He runs around and and hangs on to the ball until his guys get open. But I think Ward is Ward. To hold Chase to 2 catches, 26 yards, and Higgins 3 catches. I mean, that's a great job of those 2 guys. I was pleased and impressed with Newsome's play, and we're a little more concerned with the guys behind him. I saw Miles Harden out there as the nickel, along with a safety, Rayshon Jenkins. I asked Stefanski how Harden, and Mitchell graded out. He mentioned Harden. He said he did very well. He said, we know Mitchell, he's been here, but Harden, that was really his first, and he maybe didn't have his name called a lot, but he graded out well according to the coaches. So in the slot, that would be big, if he can help out there, because they're going to have their depth tested against a lot of these passing teams.
Again, we are here on Inside the Browns Beat on this beautiful Wednesday here in September, talking about the 0-1 Cleveland Browns, as we kind of do every year. It's just talk about the 0-1 Cleveland Browns. We were used to it. It's a thing we are. I think we're adept at this. I think we're professionals at talking about the 0-1 Cleveland Browns. So we're in a comfort zone here. But again, just as your reminder, if you're watching on YouTube or Twitch, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. Appreciate everybody that's in here. The comments have been great so far. But I want you to keep the comments going, and I want you to go ahead and think any questions that you have, any topics we want to cover. because I do see that our special guest has hit things in the background here, and we want to bring him in. Another one of just the incredible people that cover the Cleveland Browns. And Fred has already hooked us up with just a who's who list of people that cover the Cleveland Browns. And we've got another one from Lockdown Browns from 92.3 The Fan. I'm going to bring him in right now. It's Spencer German. Spencer, welcome inside the Browns beat.
What's going on, guys? Yeah, I don't know if I'm worthy of being part of the who's who list, but I appreciate the invite nonetheless.
Hey, Spencer, it's like, I've shared this with you back when I've covered the Browns forever and used to have a talk show, I think in Rochester, New York, or you were on up that way. And he'd call me or text me and say, hey, could you be on? And I was on his show. And so when he showed up covering the Browns, I said, I think I used to be on your shows. And so we've had some fun with that, but it's been fun getting to know him, and is this your third year or second year covering the team, like pretty much every day? Third year? So what's your impressions?
I started a couple weeks into 2023.
That was a good time to start, Spencer. That was a good. You picked a good year to start.
Yeah, that was a good season. It was a good season.
Tell us your journey to here to Cleveland and how the road you've traveled to get where you're at now.
Yeah, so I wasn't actually I moved around a lot when I was a kid. My dad was in sales, so I was actually born outside of Philly. My mom always used to say I should have been like a Philly sports fan, and I always told her, I don't think you realize how mean Philly sports fans are. And so we moved around a ton when I was a kid. I lived in Nashville for a short period of time. I lived back in Pennsylvania, but I ended up in Rochester from like 6th grade on through high school. And then I came to school actually out here in Cleveland. I went to John Carey University. That's where I met my now wife. Made a ton of connections. I moved back home, and to like Fred shared, I was doing some stuff at sort of a privately owned radio station in Rochester. I was covering the Bills for a couple years. I was doing a weekly radio show, and that's how I kind of got in contact with Fred to have him on. I was talking about the Browns at one point and invited him on a few times. And then some of those connections kind of came back full circle when I moved back to Cleveland in 2017. I'd been trying to get back because my wife was going to grad school, and I was trying to sort of find my path back out here so we could, start our future together. And eventually I found a way to get back out here, and I've kind of slowly but surely sort of picked up some different things. Started at 92 through the Fan in 2018. And then I've added some stuff to the list here, including the Lockdown Browns podcast, which I'm obviously doing now, to just kind of expand my portfolio and everything I'm doing. But I love every second of it. This is exactly the type of like we're doing, and I'm grateful to make connections like I have with people like Fred while I'm on the beat in the meantime, and just different people that I've met along the way. It really is awesome. Cleveland's a unique place.
Hey, can I just jump in real quick and give a little bit of love to Rochester, New York? Because two things. The world's weirdest downtown waterfall of all time in the middle of Rochester, New York. But also, as a beer guy, one of the meccas, the Genesee Brewery, right in the middle of downtown Rochester. And that place is great. So I got to give a little love to Rochester.
I appreciate it. Yeah, Genesee is awesome. The restaurant there is great. They have awesome food. I always get a kick out of some of the new beers that they release every single year. They released one earlier this year. I don't know. I think it was in the summertime. I didn't get a chance to try it. I was a little bummed about that. But anytime I'm shopping locally and I get into the beer section and I see Genesee on the shelves, I always, do a little hat tip to home, and sometimes I buy a few. So yeah, you're right. Rochester, I think Rochester's it's got some things to offer that I think people wouldn't necessarily expect. As somebody who has a toddler at home, the Jenny, I saw that comment there. The Jenny Cream Ale is a good one. That's probably one of my favorites. But as somebody who has a toddler at home, their children's museum is probably one of the best, like in the country. Like I'm not even kidding. I would put their children's museum up with anybody's in the country. So if anybody out there finds themselves driving through Rochester, New York, you're going to want to check that out if you have kids.
I got a soft spot with Rochester. There's a great Browns backer group there, Photo
That's
City
right.
Browns backers, anybody. They've had me up to host their banquet the last 5 years. I was up there this year with Cedric Tillman and Aaron Shea, and I talked to Spencer, gave me some local lingo about the garbage plate. I think that's what it was, and so
it's a
you know,
delicacy for.
yep. So we like to get to know. We like to let our people get to know the people that we're working with, so you know them a little more as a person and so forth. So appreciate you coming on, Spencer, and talking a little bit there. We turn a little bit to the Browns as far as, I mean, what about, we've been talking the last half hour about last week, but just a little bit with it. What do you think of the kicking situation? I mean, what's your take on that? How they should pursue or go forward with that?
I think the first thing that came to mind on Sunday was just how is it possible that this team can't figure out this position, right? And I mean, in some ways, I think Cleveland fans are somewhat used to it because they've seen the same thing at quarterback all these years, but they just can't seem to get it right. But the thing is, like, they used to have that position right with Phil Dawson back in the day, and it's just been a disaster ever since. But in terms of, like living in the reality of right now and where they're at with this, I understand Stefanski and the team wanting to give him a second chance. Because I do think there's something to be said for a lot of these kickers in this league that have success. It sometimes takes them finding a place where they have a second chance or somebody being patient with them for them to finally kind of come through. I think some of the Browns kickers over the years that have failed, Greg Joseph, for example, I think comes to mind. Like, he ended up having some success elsewhere and he didn't work out with Cleveland. So I get somewhat being patient. But what I thought was interesting was that they didn't bring anybody in even to, add to the practice squad. Like, I don't know what harm it would have done to do something like that. Now, maybe they were worried about, hey, we just want to show total confidence in this guy and not bring somebody in to make it even seem like we're considering a change. But in this game, in this sport, and frankly, for a Browns team, that this season for them is going to be so much about winning in the margins, right? Like, we saw a game on Sunday where it came down to the wire and they worked to a T. They've limited the damage from the Bengals offense and a high-scoring offense that they are, and were able to stay in the game. They can't afford to lose games because you can't rely on your kicker. And so I think it would have made some sense to bring somebody in this week. They feel differently, and they're going to go out on Sunday and see what he can do and if he can bounce back. I applaud the fact that they're trying to to be patient to a degree. But if he struggles on Sunday, I think it would be probably in their best interest to explore other options for sure next week if Sunday doesn't go as well.
It almost seemed like, I don't know if you noticed, but during training camp, it was almost like they were shielding. It was more about Dustin Hopkins not having confidence in him, because in the past with Cade York or whatever, we would chart, like this year's charting quarterbacks. We were charting the kicks, how many out of 5 they made from each distance. There was none of that, And somebody asked Stefanski, and he said, "Oh yeah, we're out here. Today wasn't a day to kick, because even when they did team drills, they'd run out in the field. They do everything but kick. Even Hopkins would just do a fake swing his leg, and it was like, what's going on here? Why are you not kicking field goals so you can see what's going on?" But yeah, I don't think there was confidence all the way around, and so we'll see. I mean, it's like you're sending them into a hornet's nest this week. Yeah. And a team that you said living on great defense and good kicking special teams could be 1-0. The last thing you want to be is 0-2 because you lost again on a last second kick or some kick that cost you the game. But that's where it is.
I by the way, Fred, like, you're so right on the kicking thing. Like, I think we were so caught up in the quarterback stuff and everything going on with that situation that I kind of forgot we didn't see a lot of the kickers this summer. We saw there was a couple days where they did, like end of game situations where they'd line up for a kick and each kicker got a couple kicks, but we never saw them just kind of like go from different distances and kick it. So that kind of hit me yesterday when I was thinking about it. Like, yeah, we really didn't get a chance to see these kickers do much. And I find that interesting as well, but we'll see how they handle it. But yeah, I think we're both on the same page with this, man. Like, this team's it's gonna be a struggle to win games just in general. Like, they can't afford to lose some because they just don't have a reliable kicker.
Well, the last thing about a kicker, you mentioned Phil Dawson. In 1999, they had like 3 guys, all undrafted free agent no names, and Dawson was one of them. And he told me the story. He said it to the media as well. But at the end of training camp, they didn't know really who won the job. And Chris Palmer came up to him and said, well, we're going to go with you at least this week. That was his welcome that you made the team, and he said, well, gee, coach, thanks for the confidence. Well, then he went on for 13 years, as the Browns kicker. Joe Banner in the analytics said, oh, we're not going to pay a free agent kicker. So they let him go. He was only 33 or 34 and he kicked 7-8 more years with the 49ers. So it's been the curse. You haven't been able to find a kicker since. So hopefully Schmidt gets it together here quick. Now, we saw the path the Browns want to play. Keep the opposing offense off the field. It's going to be kind of that way this week with Lamar, and play great defense. Do you think the defense is for real what we saw, or do you think the defense can carry him this year?
I think it can. I think what we saw on Sunday was legitimately what this defense sort of brings to the table. Fred, you were out there as well and saw how dominant that defensive line looked at times. I know you were in Carolina. I was in Philly, and I think in both instances, the defensive line sort of showed what they're capable of. And I think that they always talk about being like the engine of the defense in general. I think that's very true. I think the tone sort of gets set by them early on in that game. First half, a little hit or miss. They were giving up some decent drives and some decent chunk plays at times. But that second half is where you saw the true potential of what they bring to the table. And the fact that they only gave up 7 yards of total offense. There was that series obviously late in the game with the 3 consecutive sacks, which had everybody in that building buzzing and really excited about the potential that the Browns are going to win that thing. I do think they can carry them to a degree. I think what's nice, Fred, this year versus last year is part of the reason the defense took a massive step back is you couldn't count on that offense. It was a lot of 3 and outs, giving the ball back to the team. It was a lot of turnovers, as we know. This year, if the offense is just competent, which I think you did see a competent offense on Sunday, I think that defense absolutely, if they're able to kind of catch their breath at times and they're not playing 80, 90 snaps a game, I think there's absolutely reason to believe that they can carry this team and keep them in most games this season. There'll probably be some duds along the way, but if they can just, do their thing most weeks, I think they have a chance to be competitive from start to finish this year.
Yeah, and there's a good chance they could get Mike Hall back, if not this week, the next week. And there's another guy that can rush from the inside they're counting on. And so, I think that there's a lot to be excited about. I mean, you need to start one drive earlier than, that first drive, the Bengals went right down the field. I think they had over half their yards for the whole game on that first drive. But then it was like they woke up and were strong, especially in the second half. So can you do it week after week? And I think that engine they talk about is so important because the secondary's we don't feel like there's a whole lot of depth there. You got Denzel, and you're glad Greg looked pretty good the other day, Newsome, but behind that, can those guys hold up? So you got Lamar Jackson and him running around. That's going to put even more, on with Derrick Henry.
But I will say, guys, I was just going to say, it felt like on the defensive side of things, and maybe this is me being an optimist, to be honest with you, but it felt like you saw some elevation. You saw the really good players playing like really good players, but then you saw this spark from the young guys, right? Jack Schlesinger just brings a spark to the defense. He is very similar. I'm not saying similar player, but the spark that was JOK that we saw, Schlesinger kind of jumped right back in and created that same kind of spark. And it felt like you got enough good production from your big time players and then really good production from your really young players that it felt like it elevated I'm out here watching Devin Bush make a bunch of plays. And I'm out here watching, we talked about Harden and we talked about Ronnie Hickman's out there making plays. And it felt like there was almost an accountability defensively. Like, listen, it doesn't just need to be Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward making every play. That play, I know the Greg Newsome dance does not and will not ever play well in the city of Cleveland. It just won't. But that play that he made on Jamar Chase down the sideline to knock that ball away from him was spectacular. I think it felt like there was elevation out there, guys. Did you guys feel the same way?
I definitely did. Yeah, I think there was you mentioned Greg Newsome, for example, like a lot of pressure on him, right? MJ goes down. Newsome's kind of through social media indicated that he would prefer to be an outside corner anyway, and that's where he's going to make the big money potentially. I thought he really stepped up. I had some concerns about the secondary coming into the season. I just don't think they have a lot of depth. And I think the defensive line helps take some pressure off of them. But yeah, like I thought all three levels were really, really solid against a really explosive Bengals offense that has weapons all over the place. And I'll take it a step further too, Mike. Like the young guys on defense were solid. Like Schlesinger, obviously, Mason Graham held his own and was disruptive, and he was getting double teamed at times, which freed up other guys to make plays. But I also thought like this got lost in how the game played out on Sunday, right? Like because it was such a gut-wrenching loss, such a heartbreaker, and you felt like they should have won and they lose because of missed kicks and drop passes. Like what people kind of missed was the youth movement that this team sort of injected into the team this year were the biggest stars of the game, right? Like you had those players out there making lots of plays. Harold Fannin was the most targeted player on offense. Dylan Sampson wasn't too far behind. He made a bunch of plays in that game. So, like, if you're looking for a silver lining in how Sunday played out, the fact that the young players that you're hoping are part of this core moving forward and that Andrew Berry, frankly, needed to hit on in this draft class are the key players in a game like that and are probably going to be key players throughout the rest of the season, I think that's a really encouraging thing, even in a loss, for fans to get excited about.
Yes, like I said, they have 12 rookies, and Judkins' return, they'd have 13. That's, over a fourth of the team. And so if you can find a way to be competitive and thread the needle with the veterans you have and still win and develop, you can have something to build on for the future. On the, with the high-powered Ravens, what do you think the path? Can they play the same type defense against Lamar Jackson? How do you think they can slow him and Derrick Henry down?
Yeah, it's hard. Obviously, I mean, I'm blown away by the fact that Henry, because we know 30 is kind of the age where you start to worry about, especially skill players, right? Like, are they going to hold up? Running back like Derrick Henry, who's had the touches that he's had, even dating back to college, the fact that he's still running as effectively as he is and is a complete monster is pretty remarkable, honestly. But I think Lamar is obviously even more challenging just because, I mean, he can make a guy miss in a phone booth. He's so elusive. I do feel like for whatever reason, lately the Browns have had like more success against Lamar than they have previously. I know week 18 last year, that wasn't the case. Ravens still had something to play for, kind of out of it. But that game they won in Cleveland last year, like I thought they did a pretty good job containing him. I think they forced him into mistakes at times. We saw the famous Deshaun game where he came back and led the comeback in the second half in 2023, where he threw the interception and all that stuff. Like Lamar, that is like there's moments where I think this defense has been able to kind of contain him. I think the key is, and I know Miles will probably talk about this week, like you play till the whistle with Lamar. You can't. And you also have to be careful not to like get too far upfield if you're a defensive end. You really have to try to keep him in the pocket to the best of your ability. And then if he does escape, you just keep chasing. You can't ever give up on a play with Lamar because you just don't know what's going to happen. I mean, the Bills on Sunday night, there was that wild play. I think it was in the third quarter where he looked like he was dead to rights, and somehow he like spun back the other direction and avoided it, and then ripped off like a 40-yard gain. Incredible. So yeah, he's a freak athlete for sure. He's going to be a challenge. He always is a challenge. But I think this Browns defense has the right personnel, especially up front on the defensive line, to try to limit the damage to the best of their ability. And they're familiar with how to do that, I think, too, just from having played him so much.
I think, Jim Schwartz has done a pretty good job in the 3 years against Joe Burrow and against Lamar Jackson.
Agreed.
At least, as you're talking about here. And I think that was a key. You mentioned Schlesinger, to play as close as JOK, to try to replace him, because he really was a big factor in slowing Lamar Jackson down. He had the speed to stay with him. And the instincts, Wessinger might not have the speed, but I think the instincts will be a big test to see where he's at. Speaking of the running game, the Browns running game, I mean, is it the lack of the backs, or was it the lack of the push on the offensive line, or what concerns you with the running game? You can't average 2 yards a carry.
No, I think it's a mix of things. I know Joel Bitonio talked after the game about how he thought they missed some assignments and didn't execute perfectly the way they wanted to. I know Ethan Posick alluded to that as well on Monday after the loss, that he just felt like they didn't execute the way that they should. I still feel pretty confident in this offensive line as a whole. They got back to doing what they're good at, right? They got back to that Kevin Stefanski offense. They have a coach who is coaching them the way that they prefer to be coached, the sort of the Bill Callahan mentality of things. And I think that's going to work its wonders as long as they stay healthy. That's the biggest concern I have with that group. I think they can still be a formidable offensive line in front for the Browns this season. If I'm taking one thing that I'm maybe picking, I'm leaning towards a little bit more as to why the run game struggled. I do think it's like a personnel thing. I just and admittedly, like, I kind of went into the season feeling like, hey, they can be good enough in the run game to start out the season that if they have to wait a little bit on Quinshon Judkins, they'll be okay. And now I'm at a point where I'm like, no, I think they need Quinshon Judkins. And the biggest reason why is, and this isn't to take away anything from Nick Chubb, or really it's really a praise of Nick Chubb. Like, I think that offensive line was always good, but I think Nick Chubb even at times made them look even better. Because he's one of those eraser style backs. Like, guy gets through, maybe there's a missed assignment. He can make a guy miss, get around them and make something happen with his legs because he's just so incredible and he's so powerful as a runner. And I think Quinshon is, I'm not trying to say he's Nick Chubb because that would be irresponsible to try to compare him to the second best running back in franchise history here in Cleveland. But I think he's kind of that same, the same thing applies to him. Like, he is going to be viewed as a back that can erase some mistakes and make things happen. And there were some times when I went back and watched the game and Mike, like, where I saw some holes that were there that maybe like Jerome Ford didn't see, or Jerome Ford didn't hit as hard. And those are the things that I think Quinshon does for you. And so I think getting him back would be massive. I don't think he's going to play this week because now that he missed Wednesday's practice, squeezing like 4 weeks of practice into 2 days just doesn't really seem like a viable thing for them. I know there was reporting that suggested maybe he would be okay to play this week, but I think they're going to take the 2 weeks to kind of get him acclimated that they have this exemption, and then he'll be out there against Green Bay in week 3.
I don't want to talk about, because I don't want to embarrass myself, why I was looking this up, but you brought up Nick Chubb, and I went back and I was reading his pre-draft scouting notes. And this just made me laugh. One of his biggest weaknesses was vision coming out in the draft. And he was literally one of the greatest running backs vision of all time. Guys, on the other side of things, the Ravens are coming into this with like the worst ranked defense. But I feel like a lot of people that play the Bills are going to take a massive hit in their defensive rankings, including the Cleveland Browns later on in the season. So I don't know how fair it is to think about the Baltimore Ravens defense after Josh Allen got through with them. But, if you spent any time, if you looked at all at the Ravens Bills game, did you guys see anything in that defense that made you think, all right, well, there's a couple areas there that we feel like the Browns can attack against the Baltimore Ravens in Baltimore on Sunday?
Yeah, I think I was surprised that the secondary struggled as much as it did. And to your point, like, some of that might have just been, Josh Allen being Josh Allen, right? Like, he's such a freak of nature. But what I think is interesting is, like, I mean, the Bills were hitting for some real, solid chunk plays throughout that game, and especially late when they sort of mounted the comeback and were able to win in the end. And Flacco is the same sort of style, of course. I'm not saying he's as talented as Josh Allen at this point in his career. But he can air it out. He can take those deep shots, and he can hit those big plays at times. And I do think Joe was actually asked about it today, the idea that, like, they didn't try a lot of those on Sunday this past week, and that maybe they'll be looking to do that this week. And I think he sort of gave an answer that was, suggestive of like, well, hey, we're going to take what the defense gives us, and we're going to sort of stick to the game plan. But he's chomping at the bit to always take those deep shots. And that was such a staple in this offense 2 years ago when he was first here with Amari Cooper and all that. So maybe this is the game where there's some susceptibilities to being able to air it out a little bit more and push the ball downfield. And I definitely think the Browns have some weapons that can do that and help that cause. So we'll see what it looks like. But I definitely came away sort of curious about the Ravens secondary, but they're too talented, I would say, not to have a bounce back effort and not to, round into form. I think a lot of times this time of year too, teams are just kind of figuring themselves out on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, when you look at that, the shot plays, part of that they didn't have a running game. That's the other thing why it's so important, so they can do a little more play action passing, because I really think, as well as Flacco connected with Amari Cooper and David Njoku 2 years ago, I think Judy's got more upside for the deep ball than Amari did. And so, yeah, I was surprised he didn't take the shots, but as he talked about taking what they give him, keep the ball 8, 9, 10 minutes, eating up the clock. You can't argue with that, but you really need that running game. And that's why I think the silver lining is Quinshon Judkins. You drafted him to be the guy, Sampson to be your off third down guy, and he definitely can do that role. And if you can have the 1-2 punch like Judkins, Travion Henderson with Judkins and Sampson, you might have something for some time here. So, yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, and I think Sampson proved that third down role that they drafted him for, he's going to thrive in it. Like you saw that's one of the things I have total confidence in coming away from Sunday. He looked like he's going to be awesome in that role. And so complimenting Quinshon, I think, is the idea there. And if the sooner he's back and they can sort of get that thing going, I'm fascinated to see what it looks like, because I do think that's going to be sort of the bread and butter, if you will, of this offense in the long term.
Guys, part of the fun of this is talking to you guys that are in that building all the time. And Spencer, it's been a few years for you now. Fred, it's been just slightly over a few years for you at this point covering the Browns. But I want to hear just anything that you got from inside the building. I thought there was I think it was a fascinating tweet. I think it was Zach Jackson that put it out kind of maybe last week, Friday, something like that. Talked about the level of trepidation that he felt amongst the Cleveland Browns players was like 97% lower than what it was last year. He felt like they were just much more like calm, confident going into this season. So we've seen a lot of 0-1 starts in Cleveland over the years. Inside the building, guys, just coming from you and your impressions of talking to everybody, what's the vibe in the building after this version of the 0-1 start for the Cleveland Browns?
I think it feels more optimistic. And listen, I think every year, like, teams are going to start 0-1 and it's not going to be the end of the world. But I definitely get the sense, and Bubba Ventrone talked about last week, the culture being different. And just from talking to guys on the record, off the record, whatever, you definitely get a feeling that things are a little bit different this year, that there's a lot of buy-in, that guys are trying to hold themselves accountable. I think there's a lot of optimism with the rookie class and how quickly some of those guys have kind of integrated here. And yeah, I definitely think there's some of that going on here. And I definitely feel like after a week 1 loss this year, it doesn't feel quite as ominous, if you will, as it did a year ago. And part of that's the result, right? Like, you played a close game and it came down to some kicks, which is devastating from a fan perspective. But I think the team looks at it and says, hey, listen, like, we're right there. We can hang with these teams. So like last year, the team looked, the offense especially looked lifeless against Dallas. Like, it was awful. So I definitely feel like things are a little bit different this year. People can speculate why. But I definitely feel like there's a lot of confidence, and people and players on this team feel like, 1 loss to start the year isn't going to spiral into more here. And I think that's good news in terms of like them being competitive throughout the rest of the season. What about you, Fred?
Yeah, I think a lot of it starts with number 15, Joe Flacco. They look in his eyes. He's been there. He's done that. Sure, he's not the man he used to be, as Toby Keith would say, but he's a guy that exudes confidence, especially with a young team. Think about Fannin, Bond, Sampson, all those guys in the huddle. Sanders, 21, 22 years old, and they're looking to Flacco on that first drive, and he goes, I got this, guys. We're good. That's got to go a long way for these young guys, on the roster, as well as even the veterans. I know David Njoku loves him, and the whole group. You didn't know what you were going to get out of Deshaun Watson. They were hoping for the best, but we saw what happened. I think okay, you got a steady influence there, a guy who's been there and done that. He's going to go into Baltimore. I don't know how he'll play, but like he said today, it's not going to be because of emotions. He's got nerves of steel at this point, and so I just think that goes a long way in leadership on the field. The coach can be one thing, but on the field, he's a leader. Miles is a great player. I don't know what kind of leader. It's more like by example, but you need somebody that the guys can turn to and go, this guy can get the job done. And I think they feel that.
Yeah, that's great. I was just going to say a level of optimism after an 0-1 start, especially knowing the games you're getting into. They're going to need as much of it as they can get. As we get ready to wrap up here on Inside the Browns Beat, Spencer, Fred, one last question for you guys. Browns, Ravens, Sunday, 1 p.m. It's the let's shove it in Cleveland's face game because, of course, the Ravens, I know they said they did it a long time ago, but they knew what they were doing. They are going to celebrate stealing our team and sending them to Baltimore. Guys, I'm not going to ask you for a prediction, but I am going to ask you for each of you. Just give me your biggest key to this game. What's the biggest key for the Cleveland Browns if they're going to be able to go into Baltimore and get a win?
Go ahead.
I think the biggest key has to be just limiting the damage from Lamar Jackson, obviously. And if you do that, same way they did it with Joe Burrow this past week, you give yourself a chance. And I think that honestly is like the strategy most of this season is kind of what you saw on Sunday. If you can slow down the opposing offenses and your offense conversely can sort of play keep away and have some of those longer drives up and down the field and make sure you're ending them with points instead of, fourth downs where guys dropping balls and missed kicks, then I think you're going to be in good shape. I think you're going to be okay. But I do think it's interesting that like the game plan from week 1 is almost like copy and paste for week 2, where it's like this Ravens offense put up 40 points last week and they still lost. You got to limit that damage and you got to be able to sort of work the clock and keep the ball out of Lamar Jackson's hands. And I think if they do that, they'll have a chance to make this one interesting at the very least.
I agree. I mean, you can't get into a shootout with them. That's not how I see as a path. I think, again, control the ball on offense. If you have to throw those short passes again to move the ball, I don't have a problem with that. Time-consuming drives. The thing is, good defense and limit the turnovers. I don't put them turnovers on Flacco, but they occurred. Those guys have to catch those passes, those first downs and the 2 interceptions were all drop passes. So that to me is the game plan. The only missing piece was you didn't have the guy you drafted to run that offense in Quinshon Judkins. Now, you can't expect him, even if he plays, to be what you want him to be further in the season, but I think you're trending that direction. You didn't have him the other day and still had that game in hand. If he plays, if he doesn't play, take the same approach. Get the ball to Sampson in space, move the ball, take up time, and limit the damage on defense. But you got to take the ball away on defense. You got to have some takeaways. That's the one staring you in the face, other than the obvious guy putting the ball between the uprights.
Well, guys, this has been great. Catch him on 92.3 The Fan. Go over and check out the Locked On Browns podcast and just bringing us all the good stuff along with our buddy Fred here. Spencer German, go follow him on Twitter or X or whatever we're going to call it, at Spencito. Spencer, man, thank you for jumping inside the Browns beat with us tonight. Really appreciate you, and we look forward to all your coverage of the Browns all season long. I
am grateful for the invite, guys. Anytime. This was awesome, and we'll have to do it again soon sometime, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Spencer. See you tomorrow.
Yep.
My favorite way that all of our interviews get wrapped up with the see you tomorrow. Back in the office for Fred Greetham. Big shout out to Spencer German for jumping in with us and talking about the Cleveland Browns. And guys, I like listening. I really enjoyed listening to that conversation between you and Spencer because of what you do and what Spencer does. And because I think a lot of people don't just want to hear the fan talk and they want to hear a little bit more objective nature of things. And that's what you guys just gave us. And that also shows that there is still reason for optimism, even after one loss. So I really appreciated that conversation, Fred. It was really good stuff.
Yeah, thanks. As far as I enjoy doing this with, I get to banter around and get, getting good feedback with the people in the room, getting to know them better too. So this has been fun, and I appreciate you kind of steering the ship here. That keeps us on track.
It's all right. Somebody's got to drive the boat. It's all good. So listen, that's going to do it here for this episode of Inside the Browns Beat. The Cleveland Browns taking on the Baltimore Ravens on Sunday, 1 p.m. Just gear up. Like, normally I'll just put on like maybe just a t-shirt, like a Browns t-shirt or something, but I think I might just full on gear up for this one because Baltimore's celebrating the steal. Man, oh man, would it be nice for the Cleveland Browns to go in there and ruin that Sunday afternoon. That would be too perfect. Hopefully they can do it. Make sure you're tuned into everything OBR as we lead up to that game. The OBR streaming network has got wall-to-wall Browns coverage between now and then. So make sure you're tuned in there. Make sure you get over to the OBR at theobr.com and subscribe, where you can read stuff by Fred and Pete and all of our guys, Jacob and everybody that's over there. Some of the best written stuff happens at theobr.com. So make sure you're tuned in over there and subscribe.
We got next week
as well.
Next week special.
Oh, you want to do it? You want to do it?
Yeah.
Do it.
Next week from the Cleveland Browns, their beat writer, Kelsey Russo. And I'll tell you this, I'm a clevelandbrowns.com alumni the first 3 years, and I've talked to her about it. I was the beat writer for clevelandbrowns.com, 99 to 2001. Had some great football to watch.
Hey, listen, actually, wasn't necessarily the worst football that we've had.
It hasn't been much different.
Right, exactly. No, it'll be really fun. Kelsey Russo's great. She does a great job for clevelandbrowns.com doing all the beat writing, and she's going to jump in with us next week, so you make sure you tune in to that. All right, that's going to do it for us. Big time shout out once again goes out to Spencer German for jumping in with us. Go follow him. Big time thank you to him and to all of our guests so far on the show. We are having a great time with it. Hopefully you guys are enjoying it. A big thank you goes out to all of you that joined us live. The comments were great. You guys were awesome. I love the little community we've got built up there in the comments. So big time shout out to everybody that jumped in over there. And always remember, if you can't catch it live, you can always run the show back on YouTube, on Twitch, wherever you want to watch the show. So that's going to do it for this episode of Inside the Browns Beat. He is Fred Greetham. I am Michael Keefe. We'll talk to you again this time next week. Until then, as always, go Browns.